a quiet archive record. Tonight, we enter a space untouched by urgency, where time slows and thought softens. Let the edges of the day blur and quietly disappear. Across the last century, reports of unusual objects in the sky have appeared in military logs, civilian newspapers, and private letters. Some were later explained as aircraft, balloons, weather, or confusion. Others stayed unresolved, not because they were proven to be from elsewhere, but because the data was incomplete, classified, or lost. In every era, governments have faced a decision about how to handle strange claims that can shift public behavior, influence markets, and expose capabilities. Secrecy is often criticized as arrogant or harmful, yet it can also be a method of control during uncertainty, a shield for sources and methods, and a way to prevent rivals from learning what you know. The question is not only whether non-human technology exists, but what a state would do if it suspected it did. Tonight, we go through 20 legitimate reasons why the government should keep aliens secret. Start with a simple frame. We do not need to assume that visitors from elsewhere are real, or that any specific story is true, to talk about why secrecy might happen. A government can face ambiguous data, rising rumor, and real strategic pressure at the same time. It can decide to hold back information for reasons that are practical, political, and sometimes self-protective. When people say, why would they keep it secret? They often picture one big locked room and a single perfect cover story. Real secrecy does not look like that. It looks like compartmentalization, where each group only knows its part. It looks like classification rules that outlast the people who wrote them. It looks like unclear chains of custody, ports that do not meet courtroom standards. It looks like fear of being wrong, fear of being mocked, and fear of being exploited. So what follows is not a claim that aliens are here. It is a tour through reasons a government might choose silence if it had something unusual in its hands, or if it believed an unusual event was worth hiding. The reasons overlap, and they reinforce each other. Some are about national defense. Some are about social stability. Some are about the long-term risk of letting an unknown story run free. Reason one is uncertainty itself. If the evidence is messy, secrecy can buy time. Imagine radar tracks that do not match the visual sighting. Imagine a sensor glitch that repeats for hours. Imagine a pilot report that is honest but not precise. If officials go public too early, they may lock the country into a story that later collapses. That damages trust. It also makes future warnings harder to believe. A state has many incentives to avoid committing to an extraordinary explanation. Even if something looks non-human at first glance, the first obligation of an intelligence service is to rule out human causes. If they speak before that work is finished, they create a public expectation that cannot be taken back. The public remembers the first headline. Later corrections look like lies. Uncertainty is not only about what happened, it is about what it means. If an object behaves in a way that seems beyond current aircraft, it might still be a misread. It might be an adversary. It might be a secret domestic program. It might be a natural phenomenon. Secrecy gives analysts room to work without the pressure of a crowd. Reason two is the protection of sources and methods. Intelligence agencies guard the tools they use to see the world. If the public learns that a radar system can track certain shapes at certain distances, an adversary can adapt. If the public learns where sensors are placed, someone can route around them. If an incident involves a classified satellite or a new tracking algorithm, explaining the event might reveal the very capability that discovered it. This matters even if the object is not alien. The act of investigating it can expose how you investigate. A report might include raw radar data, or the timing of satellite passes, or the exact way signals are filtered. Those details can be more valuable to a rival than the story about the object. Reason 3 is the risk of misattribution. If officials say, "We saw something that cannot be ours," the public may assume it must be foreign or alien. That can raise the temperature between nations. It can create pressure to retaliate, to sanction, or to escalate. In a world with nuclear weapons, even a small increase in misunderstanding can be dangerous. Secrecy can be a way to prevent a false crisis. It can also be a way to prevent an adversary from using the incident as a trap. If a rival wants to test your reactions, they might stage a confusing event. If you respond loudly, you reveal your playbook. Reason 4 is the protection of ongoing operations. An unusual craft or event might appear in an area where sensitive missions are underway. Maybe there is a submarine exercise. Maybe there is an electronic surveillance flight. Maybe there is a covert test range. If the government explains the unusual event, it might reveal what else was happening nearby. Sometimes the most sensitive part of a story is not the object in the sky, but the quiet context around it, where it was seen, who was tracking it, what assets were moved, what communications were used. Secrecy keeps that context from becoming a map for enemies. Reason 5 is technological advantage. If something truly unusual is recovered, the first thought of a defense establishment is not public education. It is advantage. If a state believes it has access to materials or systems that could change propulsion, sensing, energy storage, or computing, it will treat it like the highest level military secret. Even if the recovered item is not alien, the belief that it might be can be enough to drive secrecy. Leaders can fear that rivals might steal it, copy it, or sabotage the research. They can also fear that rivals will claim they have it, using rumor as a tool. Reason 6 is the danger of a gold rush. The moment the public believes a crash site might exist, people will go looking. Not only hobbyists, but criminals, extremists, and foreign agents. They might trespass on bases, dig on private land, and threaten witnesses. They might try to sell fake fragments. They might try to bribe insiders. A government may choose secrecy to prevent that chaos, not because it wants to hide the truth forever, but because public belief can cause real harm. A single rumor can send hundreds of people to a desert road at night. It can overwhelm local police. It can create accidents. It can create violence. Reason 7 is the fear of panic, not as a movie riot, but as a slow panic in systems. Panic can be measured in bank withdrawals, sudden migration, hoarding, and social media contagion. People do not need to scream in the street to create panic. They just need to change their behavior in a way that stresses supply chains and institutions. Officials may believe the public can handle the truth, but they may doubt that the public can handle uncertainty about the truth. If the message is, "We have evidence of something we cannot explain, and we do not know what it wants," that is a recipe for anxiety. It invites endless speculation. It invites cults and scams. Reason 8 is the protection of economic stability. Markets react to shocks. Insurance reacts. Energy reacts. Tourism reacts. If If disclosure creates the belief that the world is entering a new era, prices can swing. If the public believes new technology is imminent, certain industries may collapse in expectation. If the public believes a threat is present, spending and investment patterns can shift. A government might keep secrets to avoid an uncontrolled economic event. Even a short period of intense rumor can cost billions. Leaders may decide that no proof is strong enough to justify that risk. Reason 9 is the defense of existing institutions. This is less noble, but it is real. Many agencies depend on the idea that they understand threats. If an event suggests they do not, it can damage reputations and budgets. It can cause leadership change. It can expose failures. Secrecy can be used to protect careers. It can also be used to protect the legitimacy of the state. Leaders may fear that admitting "we do not know" will make the public question other assurances. Sometimes a government prefers being accused of secrecy to being accused of helplessness. Reason 10 is religious and cultural disruption. This is often exaggerated, but it is not imaginary. Cultures build meaning around origin stories. If a large part of the population thinks non-human intelligence is present, it can trigger deep arguments about faith, identity, and authority. A state may fear that disclosure will be used as a weapon in culture wars. Different groups may interpret the same event in opposite ways. Some may see proof of a new creation story. Others may see a deception. Some may see a sign of the end. That can polarize a society already under stress. Reason 11 is the risk of hostile exploitation. Imagine a foreign intelligence service using alien rumor as a psychological operation. They could inject fake documents to discredit real ones. They could promote extreme interpretations to cause division. They could claim that a rival has made contact, pushing fear. If a government sees that the topic is a playground for disinformation, it may choose silence as a defensive move. Speaking can give disinformation a hook. Silence denies it a target, even though rumor continues. Reason 12 is legal liability. If officials admit that unknown objects entered controlled airspace, questions follow. Why was the airspace not protected? Why were pilots put at risk? Why were citizens not warned? Why were certain tests conducted? Why were certain chemicals used? Lawsuits can follow, as can demands for compensation. Secrecy can be a legal shield. It can be used to delay accountability or to avoid it entirely. Even if the truth is complicated, the legal system prefers clear responsibility. A government may fear that clarity is not available. Reason 13 is the safety of witnesses. People who report unusual events can be harassed. They can be threatened. They can be stalked. Their families can be targeted. If a government confirms a witness, it may put a bright light on them. This is especially true for military witnesses. If a pilot becomes a public figure, they become a target for foreign collectors. If a radar operator is named, they can be approached. If a scientist is linked to a program, they can be pressured. Secrecy can be a form of protection. Reason 14 is the safety of the investigation itself. If you are trying to learn what a phenomenon is, you may need repeated observation. You may need to set traps, place sensors, run experiments. If the public knows what you are doing, they can interfere, even by accident. There is also the risk of contamination. If a site is suspected to contain unusual materials, the arrival of outsiders can ruin evidence. It can also spread risk if the material is hazardous. A government may choose secrecy until it can secure and evaluate. Reason 15 is the simple reality of classification inertia. Once something is classified, it tends to stay that way. The system is built to prevent leaks, not to encourage openness. Files can remain locked long after the original risk is gone. The people who hold the keys may not be the people who created the secrecy. They inherit it. They may be afraid to undo it. If declassification fails and causes harm, the blame lands on them. If secrecy continues, blame is diffuse. Reason 16 is the danger of copycat behavior. If the government confirms that unusual objects were reported, a wave of false reports can follow. Some will be mistakes. Some will be pranks. Some will be scams. Some will be attempts to overwhelm agencies. That can drown real signals in noise. It can also waste resources. A government may choose secrecy to keep reporting channels manageable. Reason 17 is the fear of diplomatic fallout. If allies believe you held back information that affects their security, trust can break. If you disclose that unknown craft entered a partner's airspace, you might embarrass them. If you disclose that you recovered something on foreign soil, you might violate agreements. Sometimes secrecy is used to preserve alliances. Disclosure can be seen as a unilateral act. It can create pressure on other governments to answer questions they are not ready to answer. Reason 18 is the management of public expectations. Once you disclose, people ask, what is next? Where are the bodies? Where are the machines? What is the plan? If the government cannot answer, it looks incompetent. Officials may fear being forced into promises. They may fear that the public will demand action that is impossible, like building a defense against something unknown. They may fear that a lack of progress will be seen as proof of a cover-up. Reason 19 is the possibility of social fragmentation. A surprising revelation can become a new identity marker. People can sort into camps, not only about what they believe, but about who they trust. In an age of constant media, the story can become a permanent argument. A state may decide that even if the truth is important, the timing is wrong. It may choose to wait for a period of stronger cohesion. It may choose to prepare institutions and communication plans first. Reason 20 is the risk that disclosure changes the behavior of the phenomenon itself. This reason is speculative, but it is discussed in serious circles. If unknown objects are observing or testing, public attention could change the environment. If the phenomenon is rare, it might disappear under attention. If it is a form of surveillance, it might adapt. A government might choose secrecy as a way to keep the situation stable while it learns. It might think that public attention is a variable it cannot control. Now expand the lens. These reasons are not independent. They form a web. Uncertainty drives caution. Caution feeds classification. Classification feeds rumor. Rumor feeds disinformation. Disinformation feeds polarization. Polarization feeds more secrecy. If you want to understand why secrecy can persist for decades, you have to picture a system where no one owns the whole story. One team studies sensors. Another team manages security. Another team writes talking points. Another team handles legal questions. Another team watches foreign reactions. Each team has incentives to keep the topic small. In some cases, secrecy can be the default, even when the truth is ordinary. A balloon can be classified if it was tracked by a secret radar. A foreign drone can be classified if it revealed a gap in defenses. A test flight can be classified if it risks exposure. When later generations hear it was classified, they assume the content was extraordinary. Sometimes the extraordinary part was the context. So how does a government decide what to tell? It often starts with threat. Is there a danger to life? Is there a risk to air safety? Is there a risk of war? If the answer is yes, then warning is more likely. If the answer is no, secrecy becomes easier. There is also the question of credibility. Leaders may worry that the public will not believe them anyway. If they say, "We saw something strange," people will demand proof. If they show proof, people will say it is fake. If they provide no proof, people will say it is a lie. This trap can make silence look like the least damaging option. But silence has a cost. It creates a vacuum. In a vacuum, stories rush in. The stories can be entertaining, but they can also be harmful. They can become tools for grifters. They can become a way to recruit. They can become a way to distract. If the state does speak, it has to choose a tone. It can present the topic as a safety issue, focused on airspace. It can present it as a science issue, focused on data. It can present it as a defense issue, focused on rivals. Each choice creates different reactions. A safety frame can lead to demands for better reporting and better sensors. A science frame can lead to a push for open research. A defense frame can lead to fear and increased secrecy. Governments often choose the frame that fits their existing structures. Consider how secrecy works in practice. A small group can classify a set of documents and keep them locked. But the reality of government is that people move, retire, and talk. So secrecy also relies on soft methods. It relies on discouragement, on stigma, on the idea that reporting is career risk. It relies on the lack of reward for speaking. Stigma is a powerful tool. If pilots think they will be mocked, they report less. If scientists think funding will vanish, they avoid the topic. If journalists think editors will kill the story, they move on. A government does not always need to threaten. It can simply let the culture do the work. That creates a strange outcome. Information can exist, but the channel is closed. People see something and keep it to themselves. Over time, that silence becomes part of the story. It makes believers more certain that a cover-up exists. It makes skeptics more certain that nothing exists. Now return to the phrase, legitimate reasons. Legitimate does not mean moral. It means plausible. It means a reason that a real institution might act on, even if you disagree with it. Many of the reasons we listed are familiar in other areas. Governments keep secrets about cryptography. They keep secrets about nuclear design. They keep secrets about cyber tools. They keep secrets about undercover agents. They keep secrets about negotiations. If the alien topic touches any of those areas, secrecy becomes almost automatic. A single recovered fragment might be stored in a facility used for other secrets. A single report might be handled by the same office that handles foreign surveillance. The file inherits the culture of the office. Let us walk through the reasons again, but with more detail, so you can see how each one can stand on its own. Uncertainty is not weakness. It is a basic feature of real-world evidence. Sensors can be fooled. Humans can misjudge distance and speed. Atmospheric conditions can distort. A pilot can be honest and still be wrong. In such a world, the first job is to gather more data. Secrecy is the tool that prevents a half-formed story from hardening into a myth. Protection of sources and methods is almost sacred in intelligence work. If you show the public a radar track, you might reveal the radar band. If you show the public a video, you might reveal the camera type. If you show the public the time and place, you might reveal a patrol pattern. Even the decision to release or not release can signal what you value. Misattribution is a quiet danger. In the Cold War, misattribution was deadly. A flock of geese could look like a bomber formation on early radar. A reflection could look like a missile launch. People built protocols to avoid accidental war. Those protocols encourage caution. If an unknown object appears, leaders might treat it like a possible adversary probe until proven otherwise. Protection of ongoing operations is often the hidden engine of secrecy. If the unknown object was seen near a test range, officials may fear that disclosure will draw attention to the range. If it was seen during a sensitive flight, they may fear that disclosure will reveal the flight path. They might even fear that the object was not alien at all, but their own program, and that the story is a cover for a cover. Technological advantage is the hardest reason to overcome. If there is even a small chance that an artifact could lead to a leap, no leader wants to be the one who gave that away in the name of openness. This is true even when the odds are low. States buy lottery tickets in the form of research programs. They will keep those tickets secret. The gold rush problem is a social problem. People are drawn to treasure stories. They are drawn to forbidden zones. They are drawn to puzzles. The moment a crash story becomes official, every scrap of metal in the desert becomes a commodity. That invites fraud. It invites conflict. It invites exploitation of local communities. Panic is not only fear, it is attention. It is the sudden shift of the whole society onto a single story. That shift can reduce focus on other risks. It can break trust in routine institutions. It can cause people to interpret ordinary events as signs. This makes governance harder. Economic stability is a practical concern. Governments already manage markets through speech. Central banks choose words with precision. Leaders know that certain phrases can swing prices. The alien topic is a phrase that could swing everything. Institutional defense is also practical, even if it feels cynical. Agencies compete for budgets. They compete for prestige. If a story suggests they failed to control airspace, they might hide it. If a story suggests they recovered something and lost it, they might hide it. If a story suggests they dismissed reports for years, they might hide it. Religious and cultural disruption is difficult to measure, but leaders think about it. They think about how communities react to shocks. They think about how false prophets rise during uncertainty. They think about how extremist groups might use the story. Hostile exploitation is very real. Disinformation campaigns thrive on topics where evidence is scarce and emotions are strong. The alien topic fits. If you disclose, you may be feeding a future campaign. Silence can be a way to reduce the surface area. Legal liability is not glamorous, but it moves decisions. If an agency admits that it knew about a hazard and did not warn, lawyers will ask why. If an agency admits it recovered material and exposed workers, lawyers will ask about health outcomes. Secrecy can delay those questions for decades. Witness safety is a human reason. Many people do not want fame. They want to keep their jobs and their privacy. If the state confirms their role, their life changes. That risk makes officials more likely to keep things quiet. Investigation safety includes physical safety. If an event involves radiation, chemicals, or unknown biological risk, public access could be dangerous. Even without exotic hazards, a site can be dangerous because of terrain, explosives, or security. Classification inertia is one of the most boring reasons and often the most accurate. Paperwork can lock things away. No one wants to be the person who opens the vault and causes trouble. Secrecy becomes a habit. Copycat behavior is easy to imagine. If you confirm that unknown objects are being studied, people will want attention. Some will send fake evidence. Some will fly drones near bases. Some will fire flares. This makes real monitoring harder. Diplomatic fallout is a high-level reason. Allies expect sharing. If one government discloses without coordination, it can embarrass others. It can force them into statements that reveal their own programs. Expectation management is a communications reason. Once you open a door, people demand a path through it. If you cannot provide it, you look dishonest. Leaders may prefer to keep the door closed. The behavior change hypothesis is uncertain, but it is used as a reason to wait. If you think you are being watched, you might try not to act in ways that reveal your response. Now you might ask, why would any of this be called legitimate? Because governments already act this way around many topics. The alien topic is unusual in content, but not in the logic of state secrecy. There is also a deeper reason that sits beneath all 20. It is the problem of authority. Governments rely on the idea that they are the top layer of control. If they confirm that something unknown can cross borders without permission, it weakens that idea. Even if there is no direct threat, the idea itself can change how people see the state. If you want a real-world analogy, think about early days of a new weapon. When a state first developed nuclear arms, it did not disclose details. It did not hold public debates about design. It built a wall of secrecy, and that wall shaped the world. Or think about cryptography. For decades, certain methods were kept secret. Some were later revealed, and people learned that the state had been reading messages. That revelation damaged trust. Secrecy was used to preserve power. If a state believed it had access to non-human technology, the incentive to preserve power would be even stronger. Still, there are arguments for disclosure. Openness can build trust. Open science can accelerate understanding. Public debate can improve policy. Secrecy can rot institutions and invite abuse. But the point of this episode is to map the reasons for secrecy, not to celebrate them. Understanding reasons is a step toward judging them. So let us imagine a scenario. A radar system detects a set of objects moving in a way that is hard to match to known aircraft. A jet is sent to look. The pilot sees a bright shape, then loses it. The event is recorded, but the data is incomplete. What does a government do? The first move is internal. The report is classified, not because it is alien, but because it involves defense sensors. Analysts compare it to known aircraft. They compare it to balloons. They check weather. They check enemy activity. Then someone asks, should we tell the public? A public statement would raise questions about the radar system. It would raise questions about the pilot. It would raise questions about why the object was not intercepted. The easiest choice is to say nothing. The next easiest choice is to release a vague statement. The hardest choice is to release raw data. Raw data is messy. It can be misread. It can be exploited. So the story stays quiet. Not because it is proven to be alien, but because the institution is built to keep uncertain defense data internal. Now imagine a second scenario. An unusual object is recovered, but it is small. It might be a piece of debris. Scientists test it. The results are strange, but not conclusive. The chain of custody is unclear. If officials go public, they invite a war over interpretation. If they keep it secret, they can test more. They can consult specialists. They can prevent fraud. Again, secrecy is easier. Over time, the file grows. It moves between offices. The classification stays. The original event becomes legend among a small set of people. Each new generation inherits the legend plus the paperwork. If you are looking for one decision that creates a cover-up, you might miss the real pattern. The real pattern is a series of small decisions, each made under pressure, each justified by a rule, each easier than the alternative. That is why the alien topic is so hard to resolve. The evidence is not only in the sky, it is in the structure of institutions. Now let us deepen each reason with more concrete examples, in a way that stays grounded. On uncertainty, think about how often strong claims collapse. A video can look clear, but it can be zoomed, stabilized, and cropped. Without context, speed is hard to judge. A bright spot can be a reflection. A distant plane can look like a disk. If an agency releases a clip without context, it might feed wild stories. If it releases context, it might reveal censor methods. So it releases little and rumor grows on sources and methods. During war, militaries hide how they detect submarines, how they track missiles, and how they decrypt signals. Revealing those details can cost lives. If an unknown object is detected by an advanced system, disclosure might reveal that system. The alien story becomes a side issue. The real secret is the system. On misattribution, there is a long history of misreading new tech. Early jet aircraft were reported as strange objects because they moved faster than prop planes. High-altitude balloons were reported because they were rare. Stealth aircraft were reported because they looked odd. If an agency sees something strange, it might be a new adversary drone. If it wrongly calls it alien, it might avoid addressing a real threat. So it keeps the story internal until it can decide. On operations, military exercises and tests often happen in remote places. Those places also create unusual sightings because of flares, targets, drones, and experimental craft. If a sighting overlaps with a test, the state may prefer to keep both hidden. The alien rumor becomes a convenient distraction, but the officials still do not want to confirm it. On advantage, the history of technology shows that a small edge matters. Better radar can win battles. Better engines can change logistics. Better materials can change aircraft. If a state believes a recovered object could offer an edge, secrecy becomes rational in a narrow sense. On the gold rush, people already chase meteorites and fossils. They already trespass for photos. If the prize is rumored to be alien, the incentive grows. A government might worry about people getting hurt and about evidence being faked. Secrecy becomes a way to prevent a rush. On panic, panic can be quiet. It can show up as parents pulling children from school, people moving away from cities, sudden distrust of officials. If the message is uncertain, fear spreads. A state may decide to avoid that. On economy, in a complex economy, belief is fuel. If belief changes, the system changes. Imagine a rumor that new energy tech is coming. Investors may shift money. Companies may lay off workers. People may delay purchases. Even if the rumor is wrong, the damage can be real. On institutions, if agencies admit they do not control the airspace, It can lead to political backlash. Leaders may fear being replaced by people who promise simple answers. On culture, if the story becomes part of identity, it can create new splits. On exploitation, foreign actors can use the topic to discredit a government by suggesting that leaders are hiding the biggest truth. They can also use it to distract from other events. On law, admission can open the door to demands for health data, compensation, and public records. On witnesses, the human cost of spotlight is high. On investigation, crowds ruin evidence. On inertia, bureaucracies do not like change. On copycats, noise overwhelms signal. On diplomacy, friends can become angry. On expectations, people demand answers. On behavior change, attention can change the situation. If you have listened this far, you can see a theme. Most of these reasons are not about hiding a miracle. They are about controlling risk. Now, step into a deeper layer. Suppose, only as a thought experiment, that a government had a small program to study unusual materials. The program would likely be buried under a normal name. It would be funded in a way that looks routine. It would use contractors to reduce visibility. It would keep records minimal. Why? Because the moment a program is publicly known, it becomes a target. A target for leaks, a target for espionage, a target for political games, a target for lawsuits. A program that touches unknown tech would be guarded. Even if the tech is later proven ordinary, the program would stay guarded because the system that guards it does not easily reverse. Now think about the human psychology inside such a program. People who work there might believe they are protecting the country. They might also enjoy the power of being in a secret. They might become defensive. They might dismiss outsiders. They might treat questions as threats. This can create a culture where mistakes are hidden, not shared. That culture can make the problem worse. In the alien topic, culture matters. You can have a small number of unclear events. Culture can turn them into a giant myth. Now consider the role of time. Time makes evidence weaker. Memories fade. Documents are lost. Film degrades. People die. Secrecy uses time as a tool. If you delay long enough, the story becomes unprovable. That can be a goal for those who want to avoid accountability. This is why some people push for transparency now. They know that if the state waits, the truth becomes harder to recover. But again, from the perspective of a state that values control, delay can be attractive. Now consider the possibility that different parts of government disagree. One office might think disclosure is safe. Another might think it is dangerous. Another might think it is a distraction. In such a world, the default is usually not bold action. The default is the status quo. The status quo is secrecy. So when you hear that a government kept alien secrets, do not picture one unified actor. Picture a set of incentives, each pushing towards silence. Now we can move through a more narrative walk, following a hypothetical timeline. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, as radar and jets became common, reports of strange objects rose. Some were explained, some were not. The public was tense. The Cold War was growing. In such a climate, officials could fear that unusual sightings were foreign probes. They could fear that the public would panic. They could fear that enemies would use the story. So they would study quietly. They would classify reports. They would downplay. As decades pass, new sensor systems arrive. Satellites, better radar, infrared cameras. With better sensors, the system sees more. It also sees more noise, birds, balloons. drones, meteor trails. The problem becomes one of filtering. What is real? What is artifact? The public sees small pieces and imagines a whole. The state sees a messy pile and chooses to keep it internal. Then, in the modern era, cameras are everywhere. People film lights. Pilots carry devices. Clips spread. This reduces the state's ability to control the narrative. It also increases the state's fear of being forced into a statement, so it tries to manage, sometimes by releasing a small amount of data, sometimes by saying, "We do not know," sometimes by shifting focus to air safety. This is a compromise. It gives the public something without giving away methods. But it also creates a new cycle. The public sees that the state admits unknown objects exist, but does not explain. That fuels more rumor. The cycle continues. At this point, we can ask, what would be a responsible policy? A responsible policy would separate what can be shared from what cannot. It would share trends without revealing censor details. It would encourage reporting without stigma. It would invest in open research where possible. But the topic is tied to power, and power rarely chooses full openness. Now, let us go deeper into the idea of legitimate. Some people argue that secrecy is never legitimate on this topic because it belongs to humanity. Others argue that secrecy is legitimate if it protects life and prevents war. Both positions can be held by serious people. In this episode, the reasons are framed as legitimate because they are the kinds of reasons that can motivate real decisions. Whether they should motivate those decisions is a separate question. Now, to prevent drift, we will anchor the 20 reasons again in a clean run, with added context. 1. Uncertainty. Governments avoid public claims when data is ambiguous. 2. Sources and methods. They protect sensors and collection systems. 3. Misattribution. They avoid labeling something in a way that could trigger conflict. 4. Operations. They protect ongoing missions and test ranges. 5. Advantage. They seek to reverse engineer any unusual tech. 6. Gold rush. They avoid a stampede to sites and rumors. 7. Systems panic. They avoid public anxiety that disrupts behavior. 8. Economic shock. They avoid market instability. 9. Institutional self-preservation. They avoid admitting failure or ignorance. 10. Cultural shock. They fear disruption in beliefs and authority. 11. Hostile exploitation. They fear disinformation and manipulation. 12. Legal exposure. They avoid liability and accountability. 13. Witness protection. They shield people from harassment and foreign targeting. 14. Investigation integrity. They keep sites secure and evidence clean. 15. Classification inertia. They fail to declassify even when they could. 16. Reporting noise. They avoid floods of false reports. 17. Diplomacy. They avoid embarrassing allies and revealing joint programs. 18. Expectations. They avoid demands they cannot meet. 19. Fragmentation. They fear deep social division. 20. Behavior effects. They fear that attention changes the phenomenon. Each of these can be expanded into a full policy memo. That is why they can be compelling. Now, there is also a reason that is rarely said aloud. It is the fear of losing narrative control. If a government discloses something that breaks the usual story of human power, it opens a door to movements it cannot manage. People might demand changes in energy policy, in military spending, in space policy, in education. People might accuse leaders of decades of lies. People might demand trials. From the perspective of a state, that is a threat. So secrecy becomes a way to keep the world looking normal. Yet there is a paradox. Secrecy can make the world less stable because it feeds distrust. If people believe the government lies about the biggest question, they may reject smaller truths too. That can damage public health, elections, and civic trust. So secrecy is not a free choice. It carries cost. If we treat this like a documentary, the next step is to ask what evidence would force change. One type of evidence is physical, a material with clear properties that cannot be made by known industry. Another type is repeated sensor data with multiple independent systems. Another type is direct interaction that is recorded. A state may decide that only the strongest evidence justifies the shock of disclosure. Until then, it keeps quiet. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine a state that discloses early. It says, "We have reports, and we do not know what they are." That honesty might build trust. It might also create a storm. People would demand answers and timelines. They would demand budgets. They would demand investigations. The state would be forced into a public process. Many governments dislike public processes on security matters, so they avoid it. Now consider how secrecy can be maintained even in a democracy. Democracies have elections, but they also have permanent institutions. A classified program can outlast presidents and prime ministers. It can be protected by law and by culture. Elected leaders may not be fully briefed. They may be briefed in vague terms. They may be told that some details are too sensitive. This is not science fiction. It happens in many areas. So when people imagine that a president would tell the public, they assume control that may not exist. The state is not one person. It is a machine. Now think about contractors. Contractors allow a state to do work outside the obvious chain. They also allow deniability. If the public asks, "Do you have such a program?" the answer can be, "Not in the government," while the work is in a private firm under contract. This can happen for ordinary projects too. So the infrastructure of secrecy is already there. Now bring in the media. Media incentives favor drama. They favor conflict. They favor simple stories. If a government discloses, media will fill the gap with speculation. That can produce fear. Officials may fear that fear more than they fear the truth. Now consider the internet. The internet collapses distance between rumor and belief. A single clip can be watched millions of times in a day. A single fake can be amplified. This makes controlled disclosure hard. So states may prefer silence. Now, if you want to be fair, you also have to say that sometimes secrecy is used because there is nothing there. Sometimes the file is classified because of sensor data, and the object is ordinary. That is also a reason for secrecy, in a strange way. If a government discloses an incident and it turns out to be ordinary, it looks foolish. That can damage trust. So even empty files can stay locked. This creates a situation where secrecy is not evidence of aliens. It is evidence of a security culture. That culture may still hide something extraordinary, but you cannot assume it. Now, if we want to keep this grounded, we can add a set of guardrails for thinking. First, there is a difference between unknown and alien. Unknown means not identified with the data available. Alien means from elsewhere. Most unknowns are not aliens. Second, there is a difference between a story and a dataset. A story is a narrative with characters and motives. A dataset is a collection of measurements. The alien topic is full of stories and poor in datasets. Third, there is a difference between secrecy for protection and secrecy for power. They can overlap. A state may start with protection and end with power. Now, if we take those guardrails, we can revisit the 20 reasons and see which ones are the most likely in real life. In many cases, the strongest reasons are sources and methods, operations and inertia. These are ordinary drivers. The more exotic drivers, like behavior change, are less likely, but not impossible. But because the topic is so mythic, people tend to focus on the exotic reasons and ignore the ordinary ones. The ordinary ones are often the truth. Now, let us explore what happens to the public mind under long secrecy. When a topic is kept quiet, it becomes a canvas. People project fears and hopes onto it. Some see salvation, some see doom, some see a chance to distrust authorities, some see a chance to belong to a group. This makes the topic socially powerful. A government might fear that power. If it discloses, it may have to deal with movements it cannot predict. So again, secrecy. Now, we can take a slower, more detailed pass through each reason as a chapterless narrative, giving each reason a longer segment. Uncertainty. Picture a meeting room. Analysts have a few slides, a video clip, a radar plot, a pilot debrief. The data has gaps. Everyone asks questions. What is the altitude? What is the speed? What is the range? What is the wind? What was the sensor mode? What was the background? No one can answer all questions. Someone says, we should be transparent. Another says, if we are wrong, we will be mocked. Another says, if we are right, we will cause a storm. In that room, secrecy wins by default. Sources and methods. The same meeting room. Someone points out that releasing the radar plot reveals the radar performance. Someone else points out that releasing the time reveals satellite passes. Someone else points out that releasing the location reveals patrol patterns. Even a simple story becomes a leak, so the story stays internal. Misattribution. Someone says, what if this is an adversary? If it is, you do not want them to know you saw it. If you admit you saw it and could not stop it, you look weak. If you admit you saw it and you did stop it, you reveal capability, so you say nothing. Operations. Someone says, that area is near a test range. If we talk, people will watch the range. They will fly drones. They will record. They will trespass. So you say nothing. Advantage. Someone says, what if we recover a debris? If we did, we would not announce it. We would test it. We would store it. We would keep it from rivals. So you say nothing. Gold rush. Someone says, if the public believes there is a crash site, people will show up. We will have to guard it. It will become a circus. So you say nothing. Panic. Someone says, if we admit we do not know, people will imagine threats. They will distrust. They will hoard. They will change behavior. So you say nothing. Economy. Someone says, markets will swing. So you say nothing. Institutions. Someone says, Congress will investigate. Budgets will shift. Jobs will be lost. So you say nothing. Culture. Someone says, this will be used in culture wars. So you say nothing. Exploitation. Someone says, foreign actors will weaponize this. So you say nothing. Law. Someone says, lawsuits. So you say nothing. Witnesses. Someone says, protect the pilots. So you say nothing. Investigation. Someone says, keep the site secure. So you say nothing. Inertia. Someone says, it is already classified. So you say nothing. Copycats. Someone says, it will flood reporting. So you say nothing. Diplomacy. Someone says, allies will be angry. So you say nothing. Expectations. Someone says, the public will demand answers. So you say nothing. Fragmentation. Someone says, society is already divided. so you say nothing. Behavior effects. Someone says, "What if attention changes it?" So you say nothing. That repetition is not an accident. It shows how secrecy can become the default answer to many different fears. Now step outside the meeting room. What does the public see? The public sees silence. The public sees denials. The public sees fragments. That invites suspicion. Suspicion becomes a subculture. Subculture becomes a market. A market attracts grifters. Grifters create more noise. Noise makes real study harder. Harder study leads to more uncertainty. And so, the cycle continues. If aliens were real and present, secrecy might still persist, because the machinery of secrecy is already spinning. If aliens were not real, secrecy could still persist, because the machinery is still spinning. So secrecy alone cannot prove anything. But it can explain why belief persists. Now, there is a practical detail that often gets missed. Governments do not always need to actively hide. Sometimes they just do not confirm. If they never confirm, they never lie. They can say, "No comment." They can say, "National security." They can say, "We are reviewing." These phrases are shields. They reduce risk. They also fuel rumor. So again, cost and benefit. Now consider what would happen if a small group inside government wanted secrecy for personal reasons. They might use classification to hide wrongdoing. They might use the alien topic as cover for illegal spending or for corrupt contracts. That is a risk. Secrecy can hide corruption. This is another reason why some people demand transparency. It is also another reason why some officials resist. Transparency can reveal not aliens, but human failures. Now, if we keep the tone documentary, we can say that the alien topic is a mirror. It reflects the tension between public right to know and state desire to control. It reflects the tension between curiosity and fear. It reflects the way modern institutions handle unknowns. Some institutions admit unknowns and study them openly. Security institutions study unknowns in the dark. This is their nature. So if the alien topic touches security, it moves into the dark. Now, bring in one more factor: time pressure. Governments often make decisions fast. A sighting happens, a report is filed, a classification stamp is applied. Later, when someone asks, "Why is this classified?" the answer is, "Because it was classified." This is not logic, it is process. Process can outrun reason. Now, return to reason 15, inertia. Inertia is not only paperwork, it is human habit. People get used to not talking. They stop thinking about why. They start thinking of secrecy as normal. Newcomers are taught to keep quiet. After a while, secrecy becomes identity. This makes disclosure harder, because disclosure threatens identity. Now, if you imagine a government deciding to disclose, it would need a plan. It would need to coordinate across agencies. It would need to brief allies. It would need to prepare the public. It would need to prepare for scams. It would need to prepare for protests. It would need to prepare for markets. It would need to prepare for legal demands. This is a huge project. So even a government that believes disclosure is right might delay, because it cannot handle the logistics. In that sense, secrecy can be a failure of capacity, not only a choice. Now, to keep this from becoming abstract, we can ground it in a simple question. If you were a defense official and you had uncertain evidence of something unusual, what would you do? You would likely do what officials do in other cases. You would classify the raw data. You would share it only with those who need it. You would avoid public claims. You would investigate. That path is plausible. Now, the public might still say, but why not just say, we do not know? Sometimes governments do say that, but even saying we do not know can be a problem. It admits uncertainty. It invites fear. It invites political attacks. It invites demands. So even that small honesty can be costly. Now we can also note that some governments may use partial disclosure as a valve. They release enough to reduce pressure, but not enough to reveal methods. They might form study groups. They might hold hearings. They might release old files. This creates the appearance of openness while keeping the core secrets. Whether this is good or bad depends on what is being hidden. Now, to stay consistent with the episode title, we can treat each reason as an argument a government might present internally. Think of a memo. The memo says, do not disclose. Here are the reasons. It is written in the language of risk. Risk to sources and methods. Risk to diplomacy. Risk to economy. Risk to social order. Risk to operations. Risk to legal exposure. The memo does not say aliens are real. The memo says disclosure has high cost and uncertain benefit. This is how many state decisions are made. Now you might still feel that the public deserves to know. That is a valid position. But the state might still choose secrecy. That is what power does. Now in the last portion of this narration, we can zoom out and ask what a responsible citizen can do in a world of uncertainty. A responsible citizen can separate claims from evidence. They can avoid scams. They can demand better reporting and better oversight. They can support scientific study. They can avoid turning the topic into a tribal badge. They can accept that some unknowns stay unknown for a long time. And they can judge secrecy not only by the story it hides, but by the institutions it shapes. If the alien topic is real, secrecy might delay a hard truth. If the alien topic is not real, secrecy might still damage trust. In both cases, the way secrecy is used matters. That is the core of the 20 reasons. They explain a behavior pattern. They show that secrecy can be the default response to uncertainty plus power. And they show that when a government faces a story bigger than its ability to control, it may try to control anyway, even if control creates its own harm. In the end, whether the secret exists or not, the machinery of secrecy is real. It is built from procedures, incentives, and fear. It is maintained by silence, stigma, and time. And it is justified by the language of protection, even when it also protects the state from scrutiny. So if you ever wonder how a secret could last, the answer is not one perfect lock. It is 1,000 small reasons that add up. There is one more angle that makes secrecy feel almost inevitable. The chain of incentives rewards silence more than speech. If an official keeps quiet and nothing happens, no one notices. If an official speaks and triggers a crisis, everyone notices. If an official speaks and turns out to be wrong, everyone remembers. In that kind of environment, people learn to wait. Waiting can be responsible when it is used to verify facts. Waiting can be harmful when it is used to avoid accountability. The line between the two is not always clear in the moment. That is why good oversight matters. A system that keeps secrets needs strong internal checks, because the public cannot check what it cannot see. If a government truly wants to handle this topic in a way that reduces harm, there are practical steps it can take without confirming any extraordinary claim. It can standardize reporting for pilots and radar operators, so unknowns are documented in a consistent format. It can separate the raw data, which may stay classified, from summaries that can be shared. It can fund independent analysis under strict rules, so findings do not depend on one closed group. It can also be honest about the limits of what it knows, not in a dramatic way, and not as a spectacle, but as a statement that unknowns exist in any sensor-rich world. That honesty can reduce stigma. It can also reduce the power of rumor, because it gives people a stable place to stand. But even with those steps, the core incentives remain. A state will always worry about rivals. It will always worry about capability leaks. It will always worry about panic and politics. It will always worry about being blamed. So secrecy will always be tempting. That is the heart of these 20 reasons. They are not a single argument. They are a pressure field. They push decision makers toward the same outcome again and again, even when the underlying events are small, rare, or unclear. In the end, the alien question is still two questions. One is about the sky and what is or is not there. The other is about institutions and how they behave under uncertainty. You can study the second question, even if the first remains unresolved. If aliens are not here, these reasons still explain why secrecy and rumor can grow from ordinary security habits. If something truly unknown is present, these reasons explain why even a world-changing fact might be handled like a classified weapons program. Either way, the mechanism is human. Fear, advantage, inertia, and control. That mechanism is what keeps many secrets alive. And because the mechanism is human, it shows predictable patterns. The story concentrates around a few kinds of places: remote ranges, naval training areas, missile fields, facilities that already have fences and guards. The story concentrates around a few kinds of roles: pilots, radar crews, technicians, analysts, people whose daily work touches the boundary between what is seen and what is understood. It also concentrates around a few kinds of paperwork: incident reports, after-action notes, sensor logs, briefings with black bars. These documents are not written to persuade the public. They are written to support decisions. They can be blunt, incomplete, and full of abbreviations. When such documents leak, people often treat them like proof of a grand narrative. Sometimes they are proof only of confusion, plus security habits. That is why, when you hear a claim, the most useful question is often not, "Do you believe it?" but, "What kind of evidence would change your mind?" If the answer is nothing, then the topic has become identity. If the answer is a specific kind of data, then the topic remains an investigation. In a world full of sensors and secrets, some mysteries are created by the unknown, and some are created by the way institutions react to the unknown. The 20 reasons show the reaction, step by step, often without needing a single perfect conspiracy. This was a quiet archive story, where the story ends, sleep begins,